You have felt it your whole life, haven't you? That pull, that quiet knowing, that feeling that you do not quite belong to the world the way everyone else seems to belong to it. Maybe you felt it as a child, standing at the edge of a forest, not wanting to go back inside. Maybe you felt it during a storm, and instead of fear, you felt something like recognition, like the thunder was calling your name. Or maybe you have just always known things, things you were not supposed to know, things nobody told you, and you have spent your whole life wondering why. My friend, I want to speak to you today about something that many people feel but very few understand, something that modern science is only beginning to catch up to, something my grandmother knew without a single laboratory, without a single test, without a single drop of proof on paper. She used to say, and I can still hear her voice when the wind moves through the trees. She used to say, "The blood remembers what the mind forgets." Sit with that for a moment. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. Because here is what I want you to understand today. Native ancestry, true native ancestry, is not always written in a document. It is not always recorded in a census. It is not always preserved in a family photograph or a story passed down at a dinner table. For many families, especially those who survived the forced removals, the boarding schools, the long decades of shame and silence, the ancestry was hidden, on purpose, to protect the children, to keep them safe from a world that punished them for being who they were. So, the papers were destroyed, the names were changed, the language was buried, and the generations that followed were told nothing. But the blood was not changed. And the blood, my friend, has a memory that is longer than any government document, longer than any family secret, longer than any silence. Today, I want to share with you 5 signs, 5 markers, not in your DNA, not in your genes, not in a kit you order from a company, but in your spirit, in your body, in the way you move through the world. These are the signs my elders recognized. These are the signs that were passed down through generations of people who knew how to read a human being the way they read the land. I am not here to make claims for you. I am not here to give you a tribal enrollment card. That is not what this is about. What I am here to do is offer you a mirror. And if you look into it and you recognize yourself, then perhaps something in you will finally have a name. Let us begin. The first sign is this: you have always had an unusual relationship with the natural world. Now, the modern world will tell you this means you are an introvert, or that you have anxiety and need nature for your nervous system, or that you simply had a nice childhood with some trees and fresh air. But my grandmother would have recognized something deeper. She would have watched you walk outside, and she would have nodded slowly, and she would have said, "That one listens." Because there is a difference between a person who enjoys nature and a person who hears nature. There is a difference between someone who finds a walk in the woods relaxing and someone who feels deep in their chest that the forest is alive, that it is watching them back, that there is a conversation happening even when no words are exchanged. You have always felt that, haven't you? You have looked at an old tree and felt something that is not quite emotion and not quite thought, something older, something that moves like water under ice, quiet, present, patient. You have watched a hawk circle overhead and known, not thought, not imagined, but known that it meant something, that its presence was not random. You have sat beside a river and felt the river was speaking, not in metaphor, not in poetry, but actually, genuinely, in some language that lives below language. This is not imagination, my friend. This is not fantasy. In our tradition, we understood that the natural world is not a backdrop for human life. It is not scenery. It is not a resource. It is a living web of relationships, and every creature, every stone, every shift in the wind is part of a language that was spoken long before human beings invented words. And some people are born already knowing that language, not because they studied it, but because it is written in them. I knew a woman named Margaret. She was 72 years old, living in Western Virginia. Her family had been in those mountains for generations, but she had always been told they were Scotch-Irish, nothing more. She came to one of our gatherings, and she sat very quietly at the edge of the circle, not saying anything. And then, at one point, an owl called from the tree line, and everyone turned to look. But Margaret closed her eyes, and she smiled, like she had just heard the name of an old friend. Afterward, I asked her about it. She said, "I don't know why, but I always know when something is about to change, and the owl always tells me first." She had never been taught that. Nobody had ever explained to her the significance of the owl in Indigenous tradition, but she already knew it. She had always known it. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. If you are someone who has always felt more at home outside than inside, more at peace in silence than in conversation, more alive in a storm than at a party, pay attention to that. It is not a quirk. It is not a disorder. It is a connection that has survived everything that tried to break it. You are not strange. You are rooted. The second sign is this: you have a deep, instinctive discomfort with waste and excess. Not because someone taught you to be frugal, not because you grew up poor and learned to be careful, but because something inside you, something that has no rational explanation, recoils when you see things thrown away carelessly, when you see land stripped bare, when you see more taken than is needed. The modern world will tell you this is environmentalism, or minimalism, or that you watched one too many documentaries. But my grandfather would have said something different. He would have said, that is someone who still knows the agreement. Because in the old way, the relationship between a human being and the earth was not a relationship of ownership. It was not a relationship of consumption. It was a covenant, an agreement that went both ways. You take what you need, you give back what you can. You never take more than the land can restore. You never waste what something else gave its life to provide. This is not philosophy. This is not politics. This is a code of living that is so old it lives in the body. And some people still carry it. You feel uncomfortable when food is thrown away. You feel a pang, not just mild dislike, but something sharper. When you see water running for no reason, you feel something almost like grief when you drive past land that has been cleared, flattened, built over. Other people see a parking lot. You feel a loss. I want to tell you about a man named Harold. Harold was 68, and he had lived in suburban Ohio his entire life. He had a good job, a good family, and no idea at all that his great-great-grandmother had been Delaware. The family had changed their name and moved north sometime around 1880, and the story had simply stopped. Harold told me that for his entire working career, he had been deeply troubled by his company's waste. Not just troubled, haunted. While his colleagues barely noticed, Harold would stay late to make sure things were done properly, returned properly, used fully. His wife thought he was obsessive. His children rolled their eyes. But Harold said, "I just feel like we owe something. I don't know to who. I just know we owe something." That is the covenant speaking, my friend. That is the old agreement still alive in a man who had never heard the word Delaware spoken in his home. If you have always lived as if the world is borrowed, not owned, if you have always felt accountable to something larger than yourself, something you cannot name, that feeling has a source, and it is older than you know. You are not obsessive. You are responsible, in the deepest and most original sense of that word. The third sign is this. You have always been able to sense what people are feeling before they say a word, not because you are nosy, not because you are paranoid, but because you walk into a room and you read it. You feel it, the way a tracker reads the ground, not thinking, just knowing. You know when someone is pretending to be fine. You know when a smile is real and when it is performance. You know when danger is near, even when everything looks safe on the surface. And you know when someone needs something, even when they have not asked. The modern world will call this empathy, or emotional intelligence, or intuition. And those words are not wrong, but they are small words for something very large. My grandmother called it reading the trail. She said, most people look at a person and see what that person wants them to see. But some people look at a person and see what is true. In the old way, this ability was not a personality trait. It was a skill, a survival skill, a community skill. The ability to sense the emotional and energetic truth of a situation was as important as the ability to find water or read the weather, because a community that cannot feel its own truth cannot survive. And so, this ability was cultivated, it was honored, it was passed down. And for people who carry it without knowing why, it can feel like a burden, because you feel things that other people in the room do not seem to feel. You pick up on grief that nobody has named yet. You sense tension before the argument starts. You know when something is wrong even when everyone around you is insisting everything is fine. And sometimes when you were younger, people told you that you were too sensitive, that you were reading into things, that you needed to stop feeling so much. I want you to hear me clearly right now. You were not too much. You were not broken. You were awake in a world that had gone to sleep. Now, before I share the next two signs with you, I want to pause for just a moment, because what I am sharing today, these 5 signs, the old understanding behind them, the stories and the traditions that give them meaning, there is much more than I can give you in a single video. I have spent years putting these teachings into a form that people could carry with them, return to, and use in their daily lives. And I finally did. I wrote it all down in a book called The Native Way. It is not a long, complicated book. It is a quiet book, like a conversation with an elder by a fire. It covers everything from reading people and reading land, to healing old grief, to understanding the signs that come to you in sleep, in nature, in the patterns of your own life. If what I am saying today is reaching something in you, something that has been waiting a long time to be reached, I want you to have it. The link is on the screen right now, and it is also in the description below this video. You can click it or scan it. It is called The Native Way, and it was written for people exactly like you. Now, let us continue. The 4th sign is this. You have always had a complicated relationship with authority, not in a rebellious way, not in a reckless way, but in a quiet, deep way that is about something much older than politics or personality. The modern world will tell you this means you have trust issues, or that you had a difficult parent, or that you are simply independent-minded. But my grandfather would have said, that one still knows what freedom costs. Because here is what very few people talk about. The experience of Indigenous peoples in this country was, at its core, an experience of having freedom taken. Having the right to live according to your own understanding, your own relationship with the land, your own way of governing yourselves and caring for one another, all of it taken, systematically, legally, violently. And that experience leaves a mark, not just in the history books, in the body, in the nervous system, in the instincts of the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren who were never told what happened. So when you feel that quiet, deep resistance, when someone in power tries to tell you who you are, what you are worth, what you are allowed to do, that is not a personal failing. That is a memory. My grandmother used to say, a wild river does not become tame just because someone builds a dam. It finds another way. You have always found another way, haven't you? You have always resisted the idea that a system, any system, has the right to define you. You have always felt, somewhere below thought, that there is a way of living that is more true than the one being offered to you, that the life you were handed was not the only life available, that somewhere, underneath everything, there is a freer way. This is not ingratitude. This is not arrogance. This is something ancient, recognizing that freedom is not something a government gives you. It is something you were born carrying. I want to tell you about a woman named Rosalie. She was 64 and had retired from a long career as a nurse in Tennessee. She had always been what her colleagues called a quiet problem. Not difficult, never rude, but impossible to fully control. She followed rules when rules made sense, and quietly, firmly, refused them when they didn't, always on behalf of her patients. When she finally learned in her late 50s that she had Cherokee heritage on her mother's side, heritage that had been hidden for 3 generations, she said something that has stayed with me ever since. She said, "I didn't become a different person when I found out. I just finally understood the person I had always been." That is what we are doing here today, my friend. Not changing you, not making you into something new, simply offering you a mirror so that the person you have always been can finally look at themselves and understand. You are not difficult. You are sovereign, and there is a difference. And the 5th sign, the 5th, and perhaps the most quietly powerful of all, is this. You have always felt that there is more to life than what can be seen, not in a religious way necessarily, not in the way a church teaches it, but in a way that is felt rather than believed, a way that does not need a building or a book or an authority figure to confirm it. You have always sensed that the dead do not entirely leave, that there is something present in old places, something that has soaked into the wood and stone and earth, that the veil between what is visible and what is real is thinner than most people acknowledge. You have had dreams that were not dreams, moments of knowing that came from nowhere, experiences that you have never told most people about because you were afraid they would not understand, or worse, that they would try to explain it away. The modern world has a word for this: magical thinking. It says this is a primitive error, a failure of rational cognition, something to be outgrown and left behind. My grandmother would have laughed, not unkindly, but she would have laughed, and then she would have said, "The ones who stopped believing in the unseen world did not become wiser. They became deaf." Because in the old way, the understanding of reality was not divided the way the modern world divides it. There was not the natural world on one side and the spiritual world on the other. There was one world, and it was full of presence, full of meaning, full of communication between the living and the ancestors and the forces that move through all living things. And some people, even people who were never taught this, even people who grew up in cities, even people who sat in churches every Sunday and heard nothing that resonated, some people have always felt it anyway, because you cannot unteach what is written in the blood. You have sat at the bedside of someone you loved who was dying, and you felt something leave, not just a body stopping, something departing, something moving somewhere. And that experience did not feel like superstition. It felt like the most real thing you had ever witnessed. You have stood in a place, perhaps a forest, perhaps a canyon, perhaps a patch of open prairie under a wide sky, and you have felt that you were not alone, not in a frightening way, in a held way, in a way that made you want to be quiet and still, because you had entered something sacred and you knew it. You have had moments of grace, moments when something came to you at the exact right time, when a word or a sign or a simple change in the light seemed to carry a message meant only for you, and you have spent years not quite trusting those moments because the world you live in has no room for them. I want you to trust them. I want you to give them room. I knew a man named Thomas. He was 71, a retired school teacher from New Mexico. He was a practical man, a methodical man, a man who had spent 40 years teaching children how to think clearly and skeptically. He came to me not as a believer, but as a questioner, which I have always respected more. He told me he had never been religious, never felt the pull of any faith. But he said, every year, on the morning of the first frost, he woke before dawn without an alarm. He made coffee, he went outside, and he stood quietly in his backyard until the light came. And during those minutes, he said, he was not Thomas the school teacher. He was not his job or his age or his history. He was simply present, simply part of something. He said, I never knew what that was. I just knew it was the most honest I ever felt. What Thomas was doing, without anyone teaching him, without any tradition to guide him, was ceremony. He was practicing the old discipline of meeting the world at its threshold, of refusing to let a sacred moment pass unwitnessed. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. If you have always lived with one foot in a world that other people do not seem to see, if you have always sensed depth where others see surface, presence where others see absence, meaning where others see coincidence, you are not broken. You are not deluded. You are not behind. You are connected in a way that has survived everything. So let us gather what we have spoken today. 5 signs, 5 ways that the blood speaks when the history has gone silent. A deep, listening relationship with the natural world. Not enjoyment, conversation. A bone-deep discomfort with waste, not preference, covenant. The ability to feel what is true in a room before a word is spoken, not sensitivity, skill. A quiet, sovereign resistance to being defined or controlled, not difficulty, freedom, and a persistent, unshakable sense that the world is deeper than it appears, not imagination, connection. Now, I want to be very clear about something. These signs do not mean you have a tribal membership. They do not mean you have a right to claim an identity that has not been given to you. That is not what I am offering here. And you should be careful of anyone who offers you identity as a product. What I am offering is this: a way of understanding yourself that is larger than what the modern world gives most people. Because here is what I know. I have spoken with thousands of people across this country, and I have met many who were carrying these signs, carrying them in confusion, in loneliness, in a kind of spiritual homesickness that they could not explain or resolve. And when they finally found a framework, a language, a tradition that could hold what they had always felt, something in them settled, not because they became something they were not, but because they finally recognized something they had always been. My grandmother used to say, and this is the one I want to leave you with today, she would say, "You cannot lose what you truly are. You can only forget it." You cannot lose what you truly are. You can only forget it. And forgetting, my friend, is not the end of the story. It is just a long pause before the remembering. If today was the beginning of your remembering, if something I said today moved in you like water under ice, slow and quiet and persistent, then I am glad. I am genuinely, deeply glad that you were here. And if you want to go further, if you want to sit with these teachings more slowly, more deeply, in the way that a fire deserves to be sat with, please find the native way. The link is in the description below, and it is on your screen right now. It will be there when you are ready. There is no rush. There never was. Now I want to ask you something before you go. Of the 5 signs we spoke about today, which one was yours? Which one made you stop and sit with it a little longer than the others? Leave it in the comments below. One word, if that is all you have, or as many words as you need. I read them. I read every one of them. And I promise you, you will not be alone down there. And if this video reached something in you, please share it. Not because I need the numbers, I do not, but because there are people in your life who are carrying these same signs alone, in silence, without a name for what they carry. And maybe you are the one who is meant to pass this along to them. Subscribe if you have not yet, and remember why you are here. We are not collecting viewers here. We are collecting people who remember.